Hi all, you probably heard the news. Magnus Carlsen has lost in round 1 of the super strong Bilbao Masters as a 4-player, kind of all. He was black against Vladimir Kramnik. Let's have a look at that game to see what happened. Okay, so Kramnik played d4. Magnus went in for the Nimzowitsch engine with e6. This was sidestepped, so we get a queen's engine defense now after knight f3. Magnus played b6, as though bishop b4s might come later, or bishop b7 or bishop a6. Okay, standard stuff. After g3 there was now bishop a6, and we seem to be following a stem game. Well, both players maybe they're okay following the stem game where Kramnik played BlackElo, one of the top French players last year. Kramnik continues bishop g2, and now we see the move c5. So this is I think the most played move actually in the position, c5. And White now played seemingly a rule breaking move, some might consider, because you're capturing away from the centre with this move, but it gives White some pressure on the d file, potential bind on d5. And there's two ways Black can recapture. He actually Magnus chose b takes c5, so that brings a pawn to the centre. Maybe you can use the semi-open b file later. But after castles, bishop e7, now we see knight c3 castles, so both sides completing the development. And now queen b6, so that's another justification of b takes c5 to give the black queen that square. And maybe follow up with moves like a5, and maybe d5 is always a liberating key move to consider later for black. So now rook d8 actually would seem to prepare that as well. Rook ab1, okay, eyeing the black queen as though a3 and b4 might be played soon. And in fact, in this position, Kramnik had played a3 against BlackElo, I believe, but here innovated in this game. There's queen to be taken. So, and this did happen. Queen takes b6, a takes b6. So what do we have here? A swapping of black's potential pressure on the semi-open b file for pressure on the a file, but there's a bit of a weakening of b5 as well. It's less under black's control, b5. So b3 now, which with maybe the idea of a4 with a clamp on b5, as well as sealing any black a file counterplay. And it's in this position that maybe a shaky, controversial move was played. Maybe black was absolutely fine here after b3, maybe with a move like knight e4. I can't really see with the use of engine analysis a way of White gaining a significant advantage. And now here's an example: knight e4, bishop e4, attacking the rook on b1. Say the rook moves, now knight c6, and the knight's got a couple of nice squares. So say we have knight e5. I know that's simplifying the position, but let's assume this simplification with still the problem lurking on d6. But I think here now g5 would be perfectly safe, and even d5 liberating, and this would be okay, I think, for black. But in the game in this position, after b3, the immediate g5, there was a kind of positional sacrifice, in inverted commas I would say, which we've seen in a previous Kramnik game, where he's willing, it seems, to give up this queen's bishop for a knight. It gains in the concrete of the positions, it gains pressure, and in this game was further evidence for the idea that this is often an effective positional sacrifice. So rook a takes b8, and now knight e5. So the white knights are exerting a lot of pressure in the black position. So bishop g2, king takes g2. So there's no d6 at the moment, because knight c6 would be embarrassing. So Carlsen prepares maybe d6 with rook c8 to play d6 next. So e4. And now there's a bind on d5 and potential pressure on d6. Carlsen evicts the knight with d6 here. And funny enough, the knight didn't go back to f3, which was maybe the more cautious move to prevent any liberating d5 from black. So this is I think, a highly critical position of the game, and an interesting aspect of it, yeah, the knight not going back to f3. So let's see, like knight f3, black doesn't have to do anything too committal like g4. Black can just play sensibly, maybe move like rook d7, just prepare slowly d5. And I think this would be okay, this kind of position. The king can come to e7 to guard the d6 pawn if necessary. I don't think black would be that bad here. But, okay. The knight actually went to d3, not to f3. And in a way this is far more ambitious, because if white gets in f4, then he's really trying to clamp down indirectly on black playing d5, because I think white could then take and then play e5 and hit d5. Or maybe even just an immediate e5 without taking, leaving black in a bit of a quandary. But I think d5 here might get black close to equality. So I mean, if say these natural exchanges happened, that would be fine. Black simplified, got rid of the binds. His bishop might be slightly inferior if he's not careful to the knight though. Maybe a move like a4 to try and stop b5 and then a knight maneuver. So I don't know, maybe Magnus wasn't too tempted by this liberating move, but I think to some commentators on this game, d5 maybe was a missed opportunity here. But it's not so clear, is it? Because, you know, it depends. Is this knight going to be better than this bishop? Okay, so Magnus, he didn't play for d5. He played king f8. But now it does allow this h3 now and f4. So h3 is also an interesting move, maybe to stop g4s from black. If f4 immediately, there was g4. So really, maybe it's a good preparation for f4 now, which, as I mentioned before, is an indirect bind on d5. So there's a big strategic battle going along. You know, d5 and d5 in general. With this knight retreat, maybe, you know, this rerouting of the knight to d4 is on the cards. But after knight a4, you know, b6 is exposed as a problem. The knight has to go back to defend simply b6. Okay, knight f2 now. So that knight's also got maybe some opportunities for knight g4 later, but it's actually clearing out of the way as well for maybe white's going to double up rooks on the d pawn. It looks as though this isn't a big deal of an advantage though out of the opening. I mean, it's a comfortable kind of Maroczy bind type position. But Magnus maybe became, I don't know if we can say he became impatient, but his d5 timing in a particular position wasn't too convincing. So he plays knight c6, and now in this position with the black rook exerting pressure on b5, maybe he was starting to be really tempted by this idea of d5. He first takes on f4, now plays d5. So it looks fairly tempting. Temporarily losing a pawn, but is going to regain it. The problem is the dynamics versus the knight and bishop are now combined with, I think, slight weaknesses around black's king. So it actually starts to favour the knight, but it takes, I think, intense calculation to really verify such a concept. So after this temporary pawn sack, okay, so Magnus is going to get back his pawn, and we have the bishop versus knight dynamic. But as I say, the weakened king side here is coming into play quite rapidly actually. After this forcing move knight e5, the knight's in the dominant outpost square for the moment. But now we have, I think, a key move of the game. I want you to try and guess it here if I give you 10 seconds, because I think it does push the dynamics in white's favour for the knight versus bishop. So if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, king f3, because it clears open the g file. These rooks can start blasting down the g file, threatening all sorts of nasties against the black king. Magnus played rook a5. I mean, there were other threats as well. Rook d7, knight d7s. Black has to be very careful. So now we see rook g2 with a simple idea of doubling up rooks, and rook g8 mating. So f6, Magnus has to do something, but this next move, obviously, it faults the rook, and if it ties down that rook to b6. So now the rook can also be attacked. So the rook's struggling. It can only go to c6 now to keep hold of that b6 pawn. And then we see a4. And we're definitely seeing more evidence the knight's better than the bishop, especially combined with this g file and this horrible pawn on f5, fixing down black's pawns on dark squares on the same colour as his bishop. The bishop is hardly a very active bishop in this position, in such a pawn structure, with these pawns being restrained, and this pawn being restrained, and white possessing the g file. So after rook b7, rook g6, hitting more targets in black's position, and also providing this as a resource now because of that pin on f6 against this rook, but also doubling up rooks. It's a very strong, seemingly easy to play move, rook g6. So Magnus at least avoids the loss of his h-pawn, but now the simple doubling is simple and effective. And now after king e8, this tactical idea is used, knight e5, preventing also the black king from escaping via d7 or f7. So forcing black into this horrible, nasty position where he has to play bishop f8, and now after knight g6, another forcing move, he has to play rook f7. And now after rook d1, actually Magnus felt compelled to resign, and I think this needs some explanation here. This is looking like a highly unpleasant position, and I'll give you an example variation. Say rook a8, rook d6, so hitting b6 and potentially f6 if there isn't a protectorate, and now the king can also take time to march in to an optimal position before the knight takes f8 exchange is executed. So because it's at white's leisure, white can improve the pieces just slightly and end up with I think an easily winning rook and pawn ending, picking up these two pawns, and that one being snapped off means c5 is now totally vulnerable as well. So this would be a clearly winning rook and pawn ending. So it looks a bit of a disaster game from Magnus. This knight e5, and rook g8, just tying down completely really that dark square bishop. I think c4 here is a disaster. Maybe just takes, and if takes, just check in fact, and then taking on f8. Because the rook's actually doing an indirect job of protecting f8 in these variations. So not even c4. So if black's tied down, just rook d6 would seem an incisive way of breaking down black's defence. Let's have a look in this game, an overview and summary. So it seems as though Kramnik was playing just for a small advantage, and he's played this queen a4 line before, but it seems that semi-open d-file had more venom for white than maybe Magnus had expected. I think one of the key turning points was perhaps g5, which even at lesser levels, g5 for a lot of players is probably losing a lot of games when it's played in a slightly inappropriate position. So here it might be slightly inappropriate because of this ability for white to do the positional sacrifice in inverted commas and start to exert real pressure on the black position. So this giving up of the queen's bishop seems to be kind of thematic in these more closed positions that Kramnik's getting out of the openings. So now we have some interesting idea of clamping it on d5, and that slightly, maybe that slightly controversial retreat to d5, black maybe missed the chance for a quick liberation, but it would require a lot of detailed calculation. If we just rewind just quickly here, when this knight d3 had been played, if these points whether d5 could have been played, or here on d5 again, it's open to debate. But let's go forward now through the game, and we see unfortunately the ruptures on the king's side means that the imbalance created by this liberating d5 in this position now, after black's recollecting the pawn to at least restore material quality, the quality of the pieces is different. It's in white's favour if this knight can be proven to be better than the bishop. So white starts using the g file in conjunction with clamping down on black's pawn structure and the bishop generally on both sides of the board, namely b6 and f6 pawns. So we now see an easy kind of effective, simple and effective infiltration with the rook now to g8, tying down the black pieces completely, and now this rook d1 as though rook d6 is going to be played next, and forcibly winning material after king e4, king d5, knight f8, just liquefying into an easily won rook and pawn ending. I hope you found that kind of instructive. Magnus is young, I'm sure he'll get back. his form, which seems a bit shaky at the moment. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.